shadows of the past. Deep in the forests of Canada, surrounded by a dense wall of centuries-old trees, stood an abandoned hospital that the locals preferred not to talk about. Its official name has long been erased from people's memory, and it was called simply Black Lake Sanatorium. Legends about it were passed from mouth to mouth, about strange voices coming from empty wards, about figures in white coats glimpsing in the windows, and about patients who disappeared without a trace. It was said that the hospital had become a haven for those who were without hope. What went on outside its walls, however, remained a mystery. For friends, Emily, Josh, Mia, and Zach loved to explore abandoned places. They started a blog where they talked about these locations. When they heard about Black Lake Sanitarium, the decision was unanimous to head there. "This is going to be our best shoot ever," Emily exclaimed as she studied the map. "The hospital has been abandoned for over 50 years, and there are so many myths surrounding it. Look at this," Josh added, showing an old black and white photograph. There were doctors standing in front of the building, but one of them looked strange. His face was blurred, as if he didn't belong in this world. The friends loaded the equipment into the car and hit the road. The road was long and winding, and the last few kilometers had to be walked. As they approached the hospital, the fog thickened and the sounds of the forest faded, as if nature itself was avoiding the place. The building looked imposing. Massive walls with peeling paint, broken windows where someone seemed to be watching. There was an old sign on the door, "Entry strictly forbidden," but it didn't stop anyone. "Ready to go?" Zach asked jokingly, but there was nervousness in his voice. They stepped inside, and the air was heavy with mustiness and something else, the faint odor of antiseptic. The first room was relatively quiet. Old catalogs, dilapidated beds, broken lamps. But when they got to the second floor, everything changed. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered when a muffled rustling sounded somewhere in the hallway. "Probably rats," Josh answered, though he wasn't sure. In one of the rooms they found old archives. The documents told of strange experiments that had been conducted at the hospital. The patients were suffering from unknown diseases, and the treatment methods were more like torture. Project Icarus. Testing on 12 subjects has been completed. Result: 8 dead. For missing. "What the hell is this?" Josh read. At that moment there was a shrill creak in the hallway, as if someone was slowly opening a door. "Someone's in here," Emily said quietly. Trying to find the source of the sound, they walked out into the hallway and noticed an open door at the end. It was a laboratory. Inside were metal tables, old test tubes, and medical equipment covered in dust. On one of the walls was an inscription scratched out with something sharp. "They're still here." "Who's they?" Zach asked, but there was no answer. Suddenly the lamp on Josh's camera flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and in the silence came a low, hoarse whisper. "Go away." The friends ran back toward the exit in a panic, but it was as if the corridors had changed. They circled, returning to the same spot. Footsteps echoed around them, echoing with inhuman groans. Mia shrieked. A figure in a white robe appeared right in front of her, its face hidden by a mask and its eyes burning with a grim light. Zach rushed to the door and, tugging on it, realized it was locked. "It's a trap. We shouldn't have come here," Emily screamed. When they finally managed to get out, Emily turned around. Standing in one of the windows on the second floor was a group of figures in robes, staring at them without moving. Later, studying the documents they found, the friends learned that the hospital was in the process of creating a life-extending serum. But something went wrong, and the doctors became prisoners of their own experiments. The legend of the sanatorium at Black Lake was not just a fairy tale. Those who crossed its threshold never felt safe again. After returning from the hospital, each of the friends tried to forget the experience. But strange things began to happen the very first night. Emily woke up to a burning sensation on her wrist. She turned on the light and saw the word "back" scratched into her skin. Josh, who was editing the footage, encountered another horror. His computer, although it wasn't connected to the internet, suddenly started playing an audio file. On the recording was the same gruff voice from the lab. "You must go back. This isn't the end. Mia found bloodstains on her clothes, though there were no cuts. Zach, on the other hand, felt someone calling him constantly, but when he turned around, he saw no one. "We let something out of that hospital," Zach said at the emergency meeting of friends. "It's impossible. We're just scared. We're collectively paranoid," Emily objected, but there was no confidence in her voice. "Then explain this." Josh set the camera on the table. He played the footage from the hospital and something horrifying appeared on the screen. Figures in white coats had been following them the whole time, but none of them had seen them at that moment. It became clear, to put an end to all this, they had to go back. There was no time to prepare. They each took a flashlight, a camera, and, just in case, knives. The hospital greeted them with the same dead silence. But this time the building seemed even darker. The walls were covered in new cracks, and the air was thick, as if it itself resisted their invasion. "We're going to the lab," Josh said firmly. Everything in the lab looked the same as last time, but now the tables were filled with someone's things. Glasses, books, even children's toys. These are the things of the missing patients," Mia said, examining the items. On one of the walls, the friends found another inscription. "Sacrifice for progress." Josh noticed an old safe in the corner of the room. With great difficulty they opened it, and inside they found a journal written in the hand of the head doctor. February 19th, 1967. Serum completed. Side effects: uncontrolled aggression, tissue transformation. There is no turning back. We have become part of our experiment. At that moment, the darkness seemed to come alive. Figures in robes appeared in the corridor, but now their faces were disfigured, as if their flesh had fused with their masks. "Run!" Zach shouted, but the door slammed shut on its own. The figures began to approach. Emily glanced at the journal she'd found and noticed that it described a way to destroy the place. Set fire to the lab where the serum was stored. "We need to destroy their source," she shouted. The friends gathered up all the flammable substances they could find and poured them around the room. The fire flared up quickly, consuming the lab and spreading through the building. The figures began to scream, their bodies seeming to dissolve into thin air. But the hospital wasn't going to let its guests go. "Hurry!" Mia shouted, dragging Emily toward the exit. The friends managed to get out, but as soon as they looked back, they saw that the building had begun to recover. "It doesn't make sense. We can't destroy this place," Josh said quietly. "It's not just a hospital. It's a trap." Emily looked at her hands. The word back was gone, but in its place was a new one: eternity. Soon the friends began to disappear one by one. First Mia, then Zach. They seemed to evaporate, leaving behind only whispers. "They came back for us." Emily and Josh were the last ones left, and every day they heard the hospital's call. They knew the end was inevitable. Emily and Josh tried desperately to fight back. After their friends disappeared, they began searching for information about the hospital and related events. They visited the archives of the local newspaper, the library, and even hired a private investigator. It turned out that the history of the sanatorium at Black Lake goes far back in time, long before the hospital was built. The site of the sanitarium was once home to a cult temple belonging to an ancient community that worshipped an entity known as the Dark Healer. It was believed that this entity could grant immortality, but demanded human souls in return. It was as if the hospital built in the 20th century had activated the ancient curse. "We didn't just release something. We awakened someone who'd been waiting for centuries," Josh said, reading one of the old books. Emily remained silent. She felt their time was running out. One night, Emily woke up to a strange sound. She thought there was someone in her room. Turning around, she saw the silhouette of a figure in a white robe standing in the corner. "You can't run away," he whispered. Emily screamed, and the silhouette disappeared. She realized that the reality around her was beginning to crumble. The next morning, Josh was gone. His belongings were still there, and there was a note in his laptop. "I have to find out the truth. I went back there. I'm sorry." Emily realized she was alone now. Emily knew she couldn't resist the call of the hospital either. She decided to go there alone to finish what she had started. But this time she prepared. She took gasoline, a lighter, and most importantly, an ancient relic found in the library. It was an amulet created by those who had tried to stop the Dark Healer hundreds of years ago. As Emily approached the hospital, she realized that the building had changed. It looked new, as if it had just been built. Lights burned in the windows, and distant screams could be heard in the air. "It's a trap," she said to herself, but she stepped inside anyway. This time the hospital showed her everything. The mutilated patients, the figures of the doctors, the strange creatures that moved in the shadows. Emily walked straight toward the lab where she assumed the source of the Dark Healer's power was located. Once inside, she saw an altar surrounded by the remains of old equipment. On the altar was a strange vessel with a faint red glow emanating from it. "That's him," she whispered. But as she got closer, Josh stepped out of the shadows. "Emily, go away," he said, but there was something foreign in his voice. "Josh, is that you?" she asked, but he didn't answer. His eyes were blank and his movements unnatural. "You can't destroy me," came a voice coming from the vessel. "I am part of this world." Emily threw the gasoline on the altar and set it on fire. The flames engulfed the room, but the vessel remained unharmed. Then she took out an amulet and pointed it at the vessel. "Go into the void from whence you came," she screamed. The vessel began to crack and her voice grew quieter and quieter. The room began to collapse, and Emily barely had time to jump out. The hospital erupted in bright light and disappeared, leaving only scorched earth in its wake. Emily returned home, but her friends never came back. She could feel their presence nearby, but they were only shadows. She decided to quit blogging, stopped searching for abandoned places, and began writing a book about what had happened to her. However, every night as she fell asleep, she heard a whisper, "We'll be back." Several months had passed since Emily had destroyed the Black Lake Sanitarium. However, the feeling of unease never left her. She sold her equipment, deleted her blog, and tried to start a new life. But nightmares became her constant companion. Every night she had the same dream. She was back in the hospital. Her friends are standing in the hallway, their faces covered in shadows, and Josh's voice repeats, "You didn't finish anything." She woke up in a cold sweat in the morning and sometimes found new scratches on her wrist, as if someone had left her messages. One evening, flipping through an old email account, Emily found a message sent from an unknown address. It consisted of a single word, "Lake." She immediately realized it was connected to the hospital. She hadn't even had time to explore the lake behind the building. "But it's gone," she whispered, but her inner voice told her otherwise. The next morning, Emily went to the place where the sanatorium had once stood. Instead of ruins, she found a black lake. The water was absolutely still, like a mirror. She examined the shore and noticed strange footprints leading straight to the water. They were barefoot human feet, but instead of the usual heels, there were deep indentations, as if someone had been walking with incredible weight into the depths. Emily pulled out her flashlight and stepped cautiously toward the water's edge. At that moment, she heard a whisper coming from the depths. "Emily, you have to come." Gathering her courage, she put on her wetsuit and picked up her camera. It seemed to her that the clue lay at the bottom. She slowly plunged into the icy water. At a depth of a few meters, she noticed something strange. Where there should have been a normal bottom, there was debris. Pieces of walls, metal beds, old medical equipment. "The hospital has drowned," she whispered. But her surprise turned to horror when she saw glowing silhouettes moving between the wreckage. They were patients and doctors whose bodies were now part of this cursed place. At the very bottom, she found an ancient stone with a symbol carved into it, similar to those she had seen in archival books. The symbol emitted a faint red glow, similar to what she had seen in the vessel. But as soon as she touched the stone, the water around it boiled. A creature that looked like a dark silhouette of a man with long arms and empty eyes appeared before her. It was him, the Dark Healer. "You can't stop me," he said in a voice that echoed in her head. "I'm part of your world. I'm in your blood." Emily realized that the stone was his anchor in this world. Not knowing what to do, She pulled the amulet she had found earlier from her bag and placed it against the stone. The light from the amulet became blinding and the dark creature screamed, disappearing into the maelstrom. The lake began to churn, its surface covered in bloody foam. Emily barely had time to surface before the strong current pulled her back in. She lost consciousness. She woke up on the shore, exhausted but alive. The lake was gone, leaving behind only dry land. All that was visible at the bottom of the lake was the wreckage of the hospital. Her nightmares stopped, but Emily knew she would forever be connected to this place. She decided to write a book to warn others about those who try to play with forces they don't understand. Her friends never came back, but sometimes when she looked at old photographs, she felt their presence. Though evil had been defeated, Emily knew. Places like the Black Lake Sanitarium existed in every corner of the world. After the destruction of the lake and the destruction of the Black Lake Sanitarium, Emily returned to her home. Her book, Shadows of the Past, was quickly gaining popularity, and many readers were beginning to share their own stories of mysterious and cursed places with her. But one story received via email made her heart sink. The email was short. "You're not done. Come and see for yourself." The attachment was a photograph. It showed an old house standing at the foot of the mountains, with shadows in its windows. In the background was a dense forest. Beneath the photo was an inscription, "West shore of the lake. You know where that is?" Emily realized that the evil hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved on to another place. Emily was once again faced with the choice of ignoring the warning or heading into a new nightmare. She knew it could be a trap, but a sense of responsibility kept her on her toes. Gathering her wits, she took her notes and equipment and set off for the western shore of the lake, even though it had disappeared. Upon reaching the designated spot, she saw the very same house. It looked old and askew, but still strangely familiar. "It's impossible," she whispered. The house looked exactly like one of the hospital rooms, but how had it gotten here? Emily stepped inside. The air inside was as musty and heavy as an abandoned hospital. There were dusty files on the floor, old medical devices, and the walls were scrawled with strange symbols. She heard the floorboards creak behind her. Turning around, she saw a figure. It was Josh. "You're here," he said, but his voice was distorted, like he was speaking from another dimension. "Josh, is that you?" Emily stepped closer, but he only backed away slowly. The figure disappeared behind the door leading to the basement. Emily walked down into the depths of the basement, lighting the way with a flashlight. On the walls were inscriptions that resembled the symbolism of a cult. An old medical table stood in the center of the room, and on it was a new vessel, similar to the one she had destroyed at the hospital. "I knew you would come," came a voice. The dark healer appeared before her, his silhouette more distinct than before. It was almost human now, but still terrifying. "You freed me when you destroyed the sanitarium. I'm stronger now." Emily reached for the amulet, but the creature only laughed. "You think I'm going to make the same old mistake? This place is my new home now." The lantern's light began to fade, and the basement was filled with the whispering of many voices. The figures of her friends appeared around Emily, but they were distorted, empty-eyed. "Emily, stay with us," they whispered. She felt something pulling her towards the vessel, but with an effort of will she was able to resist. "You feed on pain and fear," she said, "but I have no more fear." She dropped the amulet into the vessel and triggered the self-destruct mechanism she had built into the device she had brought with her. The explosion deafened her, the light blinding everything around her. When Emily woke up, she was on the surface. The house was gone, and with it all its horrible inhabitants. The ground around it looked charred, as if a fire had passed through here. But something was wrong. She realized that her body had become weightless. She looked at her hands and saw that they were becoming transparent. "You won, but it's not without consequences," came a voice. It was Josh. "You're part of their world now." Emily smiled, feeling her soul leave her body. She knew she had sacrificed herself to stop evil. Since then, the place where the house had become empty. No one dared to go there, and even the animals avoided the forest around it. but sometimes a whisper could be heard in the branches. Quiet, barely audible. This is not the end. Several years had passed since Emily's disappearance. Her book Shadows of the Past had become a cult book. Many thought she was a brilliant writer, and some thought she was just a fiction writer. However, for those who read between the lines, the book was not a work of fiction, but a true warning. Among such readers was Liam, a young journalist obsessed with mystical stories. After reading Emily's book, he began to gather information about her and the cursed places mentioned in her notes. Liam discovered a strange detail. The place where Emily disappeared became the center of rumors. Locals claimed that sometimes screams were heard there at night and a dim red light appeared in the sky above the forest. Liam decided to go there, armed with a camera, a voice recorder and a map that showed the supposed location of the disappeared house. When he arrived at the site, he was surprised to find that the forest around him was dense, but dead. No birds, no insects, just complete silence. It was as if time had stopped here, he whispered, turning on the recorder. When he reached the center of the clearing, he felt a sharp headache. At that moment, he noticed something strange. There was an old, burned camera on the ground, similar to the one that might have been Emily's. Picking up the camera, Liam felt the air around him become heavy. A voice came from the recorder, faint, barely audible. "Go away. There's no escape here." Liam froze. The voice was female and he recognized it. It was Emily. "Emily? Is that you?" He shouted, but there was no response. Then he turned on the camera, and it suddenly worked, despite its shabby appearance. The screen flickered with images. The hospital, the lake, the searching faces of Emily's friends. But the very last frame showed something new, a door hidden behind a rock, engraved with the symbol Liam had seen in the pages of Emily's book. Liam had found this door deep in the woods, hidden behind dense thickets. It was closed, but next to it lay the very amulet described in the book. Gathering his courage, he placed the amulet against the door. It opened, letting out icy air and whispers that grew louder by the second. Beyond the door was a long hallway leading downstairs. Liam lit a flashlight and started down. The corridor led him into a huge underground room, filled with strange mechanisms that seemed alive. In the center stood the same vessel, but now it was larger, its light brighter. Around the vessel stood shadows, faceless figures whispering one word, "Eternity." "You have come too far," came a voice. It was the Dark Healer. His figure emerged from the shadows, now fully formed, with burning red eyes. "Where's Emily?" shouted Liam, trying not to show fear. "She's here with us. She's part of the new world, just like you will be." Liam realized he had only one option left: destroy the vessel. He rushed toward it, but the shadows blocked his path. Every touch of them robbed him of his strength. But he remembered Emily's words from the book, "Fire is their weakness." Liam pulled out a lighter and the bottle of flammable mixture he'd brought with him. With a final effort, he threw the bottle into the vessel and set it on fire. The flames engulfed the room. The voices of the shadows turned into screams, and the Dark Healer disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Liam jumped out of the dungeon as it began to collapse. He looked back and saw the entrance to the corridor disappear and the forest around him fill with the sounds of nature. When he got home, he found the final footage in his camera. The face of Emily. She was smiling, but her eyes were sad. "Thank you," she said softly. Liam published his story, but, like Emily, felt that the evil only lurked. He realized that such places would find new victims until someone stopped them for good.